Before the Federal Reserve System, we didn't have a government bank. The banking system was very fragmented, and we experienced these panics in which monetary conditions would change.
A shock would hit the economy, the banks fail, and then other banks would fail.
Bank customers would become suspicious, and they would want to pull their money out of that bank, and then some other people would be afraid that their bank would go, and so people would want to pull their money out of deposits and withdraw the money as currency.
The banks would not have the currency to pay out, and they would just close their doors.
There was no lender of last resort. Okay, you didn't have a central bank like the Bank of England that could provide reserves to the New York banks.
1907 was a sort of a watershed panic.
The panic of 1907 was the straw that broke the camel's back. The U.S. is the biggest economy in the world. Americans are saying, gee, other countries with central banks are not having so many financial crises. Why are we?
And it said, wait a minute, the U.S. government couldn't deal with this crisis. What's wrong with us? The Brits have the Bank of England, and the Germans have the Reichsbank. Something has to get done here.
In 1910, Senator Nelson Aldrich summoned New York's most powerful bankers to an island off the coast of Georgia to secretly negotiate plans for an American central bank. Traveling under false names in a private railroad car, the great secrecy of this expedition would foster conspiracy theories for decades to come.
Later on, when people got wind of this, they said, uh-oh, it's the same old story of the rich guys creating something that'll be good for them and not so good for all of us.
Different parts of the country were suspicious of some proposals that left New York or Wall Street or Washington too much in control. It was actually Woodrow Wilson who proposed what I consider to be an ingenious compromise, which we have today, a decentralized central bank.
12 reserve banks that would be owned by the member banks, and a central coordinating authority in the Federal Reserve Board in Washington.
Over the next century, the Fed's problems didn't come from its structure, which divided interest rate votes between publicly appointed board members in Washington and privately appointed regional bank presidents, and sent any profits to the U.S. Treasury. What would plague the Fed instead, in each of its three major crises, was its reluctance to abandon old ideas, even in the face of mounting danger.
Islam. This is Minister Syed al-Mahdi, and today is Shaban the 8th. I titled this lecture, I'm Not Running. Allah says Allah forbids interest and allows donations. Mahika la riba. The word mahika means to erase something, to exterminate, to get rid of it. So interest is a crime in Islam, and I'm going to show how the American economy, as you've seen in the video, the American economy was built off of this. In 1913, their money had no gold standard. There was nothing backing the dollar, and so private bankers began to loan money to the United States, putting them in debt, adding interest rates. 1913 was the collapse of the gold standard. Private bankers loaned money to the feds. So every war is funded by private banks, causing more inflation to the unvaluable dollar. Interest rates are added, so who are the collateral? Because America doesn't have any money or anything to back up the dollar. So who is the collateral? How are you going to pay all these private bankers back, according to this secret private meeting that they had on Jekyll Island? See, that's just the Kafir way. We have the American government as an example on what not to do. 93% of Islamic masjids participate in this monopoly system, however, because every masjid is giving money to the government. As a matter of fact, the monopoly system in the masjid is that you give your sadaqah to them, zakat, And we know in Islamic law you have to have a khalifa to take 1/4 of it. But because there is no khalifa, all that money is going to the imams, the scholars, right? Who are not giving it to the poor. Because Allah says all charity, because we don't do riba, all sadaqah goes to the fuqara, the poor, the destitute, the Rhodes Scholar, those who have interest in Islam, right? To free slaves. Like, this is supposed to be a system that frees poverty. 93% of Islamic masjids participate in this masjids, in this monopoly system. And this is something that's forbidden. Poverty is created as a test for man to not lean to interest, to riba. 268, chapter 2, 268, that the devil will test you with poverty. Right? So inflation is created for mind control and the people, over the people, right? To turn men into savages. Think about it. When you fight a war, how can you have an inflated economy? The purpose of war is to take the booty, the children, the gold, the land, and the resources. If you was in debt, you're gonna pay it off because you just got everything to pay it back. Ain't that right? So inflation is created for mind control over the people. They actually created a story to make you think like they're out of money. That's why we use gold as a standard, because you weigh it. You weigh gold, you can weigh it. But when you're able to change the value of money like this.
The Federal Reserve has the power to create money. If you or I run the printing press in our basement, we're counterfeiters. When the Federal Reserve runs the printing press, the electronic printing press, it's monetary policy.
Monetary policy is when the Fed uses its power to create or destroy money, to lower or raise interest rates. If it creates more money in the system, money becomes more available and interest rates fall, so we're more likely to borrow and spend. If the Fed takes money out of the system, we borrow and spend less and are more likely to save.
If you're raising rates, you want to slow economic activity to cool inflation. When you lower rates, you want to stimulate some economic activity.
The change in rates by the Fed is really a question of gas pedal versus brake.
In the 1920s, the Fed reached beyond its original mandate and began to use this newfound power to steer the U.S. economy.
The Fed moved into managing the overall macroeconomy. Now, unfortunately, its first foray into that was the Great Depression.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference.
30 years after World War I tore apart the gold standard, a new system was finally created to replace it in 1944. The U.S. dollar would be linked to gold, and the rest of the world would link their currencies to the U.S. dollar. The Fed would be the banker to the world.
But shortly after agreeing to the Bretton Woods system, Congress passed the Employment Act of 1946.
The country decided to add to the Fed's mission, stabilizing employment over the business cycle.
No one wanted another depression. People were afraid of another depression. But that conflicted with what they had agreed to at Bretton Woods, because Bretton Woods told them they had to control inflation.
Fear of unemployment was the new ideology, which, like the gold standard, the Fed would abandon only after great social cost.
The middle of the 1960s was a very nice period.
There was no inflation, no unemployment, and a lot of self-congratulation in Washington, D.C. They finally had got it. Fiscal policy would be just so, monetary policy just so, and we would have the kingdom of heaven right here in the United States of America.
This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson announced a sweeping vision to transform the country into what he called the Great Society.
However, beneath the surface of things, there was trouble.
Johnson's Great Society programs and his massive escalation of the war in Vietnam drastically increased government spending and caused prices in the U.S. to shoot higher.
The war in Vietnam was, like all wars, the cause of a governmentally orchestrated inflation.
To protect the value of the dollar, Fed Chairman Bill Martin needed to raise interest rates, as he had done since 1951. But Lyndon Johnson was a different kind of president.
Johnson said, no, we don't want interest rates to rise. We don't want to derail the Great Society. We don't want to create a recession. We've got a war to fight. And the Fed caved in.
He knew that he shouldn't be doing that, but he believed it wasn't his responsibility to tell the Congress they couldn't run deficits.
I've talked for a long time about the independence of the Federal Reserve. That's independence within the government, not independence of the government.
So if there was a big private investment boom, he could raise interest rates to stop it. But if there was a big public expenditure boom, that was not his responsibility to stop. That was the Congress.
The results were disastrous. Vietnam and then Johnson's Great Society programs on top of that was too much demand for the economy, created this immense inflation.
At Bretton Woods, the U.S. had promised to be the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. But the Fed had created far more dollars than it could ever redeem in gold. And now the U.S. could no longer keep that promise.
And by 1971, it was clear the dollar could no longer be exchanged into gold. Finally, President Nixon, in front of a television camera, bumping, I think, Gunsmoke off the air. Maybe it was Bonanza.
Bonanza will be shown after a special report from NBC News.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserves.
If you study the history of all the ancient civilizations, Babylon, Dammud, and Madian, they all fell because of inflation. That's how you get mind control over the people. You started inflating your government and use war as the excuse. But the truth is, it don't cost anything to start a fight. Because when you really are fighting, it's not about money, it's about honor and respect. Right? True countrymen fight for their flag at all costs. The Battle of Badr is the perfect example. Because it was 300 men against 1,000. They were out-weaponized and outnumbered. But these people had love for their flag, love for their prophet, love for their countrymen. I'm talking about blacksmiths was making as many swords as they possibly can, no cost. When you really want to fight a war, everybody's going to contribute to the fight because it's like, this is about honor and respect. But today we got toy soldiers who are bought. So they have the ability to make up excuses and lies. Like this is like WWF boxing or MMA fighting. When you actually put a price on a fight, it's like MMA. This is what's really happening when you see America go to wars. It's really it's a game. It's a joke. It's a monopoly. Allah promises hell eternally, right? A curse and shame for all hypocrites and kafirs. 968. So that's every African American, Asian, Indian, African, and European Muslim in America following these hypocrite imams and scholars who play this monopoly game of riba, interest, inflation. You better get yourself away from these people, man, or you're gonna be like them, because Allah don't give them no mercy. Prophet Muhammad said, I am the messenger of God to all people. After me, there will be leaders from my family. Right? Whoever supports, loves, follows him, and acknowledges their authority is of me, will meet me, and will be of me. And whoever doesn't, it's the vice versa, it's the opposite. So Allah says in 263, whoever opposes the messenger gets the fight. So this is a warning for the people to know that, the Mahdi is coming to tell y'all about, justice, like doing the right thing. Like, this world is so greedy for something that doesn't have any value. And the things that it do to people, it really dehumanizes people, man. And it's actually dehumanized a lot of Muslims who are supposed to be the beacons of light. So all you Muslims who hear the sound of my voice, understand. You have a duty, and that's to stand up for your religion, your God, your prophet, and your leaders. That will be 12. I'm not running. I'm still strong, and I'm still not giving up. I pray through the Moorish crown for Allah to give me strength, help, and assistance and guidance from above and below. MashaAllah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah.